This is Syracuse Sports. Hi, I'm Brent. I'm your host, and this is the second in a series where syracuse.com's Emily Leiker and I are revisiting the most recent Syracuse football recruiting slash transfer classes and kind of regrading them, if you will. Who was overvalued? Who was undervalued? Who met expectations? Who was a 3-star that should have been a 4? Were there some 5 stars born out of these classes that if you went back, looked at them, reevaluated, regraded, there certainly are. So we've already done 2020. Today, Emily and I look at 2021, and then next week we'll do 2022 and 2023. So that's got your memory going, right? That's if you're a Syracuse football fan and you know that we're doing this, what you should do is go back and look at these classes and give me your feedback on what you think, not only about what we're saying on the pod, but what you saw in looking back at those classes. And that is one of the great benefit of being a Syracuse Sports Insider, because you can text that to me directly. Not only what you think about those classes that we're looking back on, what you think about Syracuse sports anytime. Got a question for me, something you want me to check out for you, a story tip, just want to talk sports, just want to talk SU sports, get the latest. If I have breaking news, you'll get it first. My opinions first, and just the ability to text back and forth with me. That is the benefit of being a Syracuse Sports Insider. Text the word orange to 315-847-3895. It's free to try for 2 weeks. Check it out. See what we're doing, what we're texting back and forth, the things that you have for me. And then it's just $3.99 a month. After that, less than $1 a week to stay in tune with the latest in Syracuse sports and to have a direct text line to me. So as mentioned, this is 2021. Emily and I look back on 2020, so make sure you check out that episode and also recent episodes of Syracuse Sports where I had a conversation with Ariel Elwani, who is the journalist, the guy when it comes to covering MMA. Syracuse grad, had a really interesting story to tell. How they're going to make up for the McGregor fight that was recently canceled. Will John Jones come back? Yeah, we talked some MMA from a guy who's at the top of the list when it comes to coverage of that sport, and that's Ariel Elwani, Syracuse grad. We also had a really fun podcast recently where we drafted the top 5, the starting 5, if you will, plus 1 Syracuse hoops all-time. Eric Devendorf and Syracuse Sports Insider Frankie Sarancino. We got together. We did that draft. We had a blast. So if you hadn't had a chance to check that out, we'd probably pick Dave being a little low on that podcast, and you guys certainly let us know about that. But that is what being a Syracuse Sports Insider is all about. So we hope you can join that group. We hope you can listen to the pods, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Spotify or Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. 2021 on deck here. Let's do it. The second of our series here, Emily, we're looking back on the 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 classes and just kind of going through the names again, reevaluating them. Should they be bumped up star-wise? Are they overvalued? Are they undervalued? Did they meet expectation? The 2021 class was rated 60th in the country, 13th in the ACC, and had 21 commits. And remember that transfers are really starting to uptick at this point here. So I'm just going to go through the 247 list here as we did with 2020 and see what comes to mind. And the first name here, Enrique Cruz from Villa Park, Illinois, 6'5", 252 pounds at the time, 220th nationally, 23rd at his position, 4th in the state of Illinois. At the very least, I feel like he met expectation. Came in as a 4-star. He's been a solid, productive offensive lineman for Syracuse, and he's even got his own tailgate now. Maybe that puts him into the undervalued category. Who saw that coming?
The Syracuse tailgate does give you an extra oomph to have that kind of NIL brand deal. So he's a 4-star by the 247's metric. I did peek at what he was in the composite because I was curious because, those vary a little bit. He is a 3-star in the composite. So he's one of those guys that some sites had him rated higher, and altogether he ended up a 3-star. I think he's met expectations. I think I'm a little curious to see if he retains his starting spot this year that he earned last year, and that he kind of poked in on his very first season. I don't know if he's going to or not. I don't know. They've brought in so
He's
many
got some
offensive
competition.
tackles.
Yeah.
He's got some competition. I think he was specifically called out either by Fran or Dale Williams as like being in competition for one of the last tackle spots. I think Demetrius Weatherspoon has one or had one in spring, but now there's a lot of other guys. Davion Washington from Colorado is coming in, a couple other guys. So I'm curious if he's going to have the same role this year as he did last year. So that's why I'm keeping him at Met expectations, I think, right now.
I think that's fair. Like you said, a 4-star or 3-star, depending on which you go at. But he came in highly rated, got on the field, still has a chance to play, hasn't fallen into either category. He does have the nice bonus of the tailgate, but we'll put Met expectations. Now, here's an intriguing prospect here. Duce Chestnut, Camden, New Jersey, 5'11", 180 cornerback. He was rated 44th at his position, 9th in New Jersey coming in, makes an immediate impact. One of the top freshmen in the ACC in 2021. He was the Rookie of the Year runner-up in the ACC that year. He ended up with 83 tackles, 4 interceptions, leaves Syracuse, goes to LSU, just didn't work out for a myriad of reasons. And then at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve into New Year's Day, 2024, he announces he's coming back. Now, he was a 3-star prospect, very highly rated, was productive while he was here, didn't quite make it at LSU. So I'm putting him at Met expectations. He was the 9th rated prospect in New Jersey, one of the highest rated prospects coming in, and one of the more exciting prospects coming into that class. He was productive, just went in the portal, but given what Syracuse needed out of him, I think it's exactly what they thought. If not, you could say maybe a tad undervalued.
Yeah, I waffled between the two because I think certainly his freshman year, if we had done this experiment right after he came in as a freshman and we're looking back right away at the class he came in with, like he was certainly undervalued for his performance his freshman year. I mean, he was one of those rare true freshman starters. He was like a freshman All-American, like really made an impact. That 2022 season, he was still one of the better players on the team, but I do think he underperformed a little bit based off the expectations that had been set his freshman year. And then, of course, like you said, you have the LSU season where, like, last year he doesn't really play at all, and we don't know. We do know it was like an injury thing, but like we don't know like what that season could have looked like
Right.
if he wasn't injured. Like, could he have been good in the SEC if he hadn't been dealing with his shoulder injury? Like, or was that just like a level that maybe he wasn't ready for or can't play at? And then now you have him switching positions and moving into a safety role, and so there's so much up in the air with him. I think we will end up feeling he was underrated as a 3-star prospect. Certainly like 7th in the state in New Jersey. That probably checks out, or whatever number he was. I'm showing 7th, but I'm still on the composite. But I think he's kind of teetering probably right now. Like I'm gonna wait to see how he comes back this fall and what he looks like in the safety role.
That leaves us to Justin Lamson, who's an intriguing prospect out of El Dorado Hills, California, 6'3", 210, 42nd in his position, 54th in the state of California coming in. 3-star prospect, had that great spring game, would have been in competition in the room at quarterback, but we're getting into the transfer portal world a little bit more here. He transfers to Stanford, where Emily got on the field. He was productive. He split duties. He helped them win games. He wasn't the guy at Stanford. He was in kind of a unique situation, but enough that you noticed, and that what could have been had he stayed at Syracuse, or just, obviously, Shrader came in, and as we'll get to coming up here later, and I don't think he would have beat him out for the job necessarily, but given all the ratings that are there, Met expectations, probably, if not, maybe that's what I'm going to go with. I think looking at the ratings, looking at what he was, not like he was a top 10 prospect or something. He came in as somebody who could get on the field, and maybe not at Syracuse, but he did get on the field and showed that maybe he would have pushed to get on the field at the very least as a backup here.
Right. I had him at the expectations too. And referencing back to kind of my metric point for that I mentioned on our 2020 episode is like, I think like a 3-star, which is what most of these guys are that we're talking about. And so that's kind of what we're using. I think of a 3-star as like a guy that comes in and can contribute, but just isn't maybe consistently contributing or isn't necessarily on the depth chart. But like if you throw him in there, he's going to be able to do something. And that was certainly Justin for them, though obviously he had his injury and then left in the spring and stuff like that. So I think Matt expectations is right for what he's done since leaving Syracuse.
Another eyebrow raiser here that may be answered in this upcoming season. That's Umari Hatcher out of Virginia, 6'3", 175. He was rated 114th at his position, 20th in the state of Virginia coming in. Look, that wide receiver room is more crowded. It's healthier, as we mentioned, with Pena and OG and some players that have been brought in, not only through the portal, but some freshmen that could contribute. But Hatcher's a guy that, he has said, others have said, don't count him out. Even with all the new names in there, he's still somebody that's trying to fight his way through. So to this point, maybe he's a tad overvalued just because we haven't seen the production maybe we thought we would, but we've seen the talent, and he's still got a chance to go out there and prove himself even in what is a talented room.
Yeah, I was thinking like all the receivers we've talked about so far, like one of the main points we've harped on is the lack of consistency. And I that applies with Hatcher here as well. But like, how much of that is the fact that Garrett Shrader spent most of the past 2 seasons hurt, like unable to throw a football at his full capacity? Like there is like some statistics, like PFF does like a little bit of work around like targets that are actually dropped versus targets that were like uncatchable and stuff like that. I don't always think it's like entirely accurate. But I think like going back through those numbers, I'd like to do a little bit more, because for these guys like Damian Alford and Isaiah Jones, who we talked about on last episode, and Umari Hatcher here, it's kind of like, right, like there's so much potential talked about with them, but we just don't see it manifest like consistently. And I think obviously Hatcher's the only one still around to see if this is true potentially, but like I'm curious if bringing in a healthy quarterback, and a quarterback that's certainly a little bit more talented than Garrett was, if that changes, and if we really see Hatcher blossom on the passes he is targeted on. Obviously, like you said, there'll be fewer of them, but
right, we could almost create his own intriguing category. Like, hang in there with this guy. Like, I almost don't want to give him a grade at this point. Malik Matthew, linebacker out of the Bronx. The intriguing thing about him, Emily, quickly, was he was 3rd in the state of New York coming in. You always want those New York prospects, but obviously kind of falls into the incomplete category. Josh Huff out of Pennsylvania, 6'2", 235 running back. He was 56th at his position, but 25th in the state of Pennsylvania, which I think would put him in the overvalued category, because you got the 25th rated player in that state coming in. And remember, this is kind of who could be the heir apparent to Sean Tucker or could get on the field, and it just never panned out, and he transferred out, and we haven't really heard from him since.
Yeah, he's a name I recognize, but I didn't really ever see anything of. So
Malcolm Folk was a safety. Speaking of Pennsylvania, he was 78th at his position. Again, 26th in the state. Huff was 25th in the state, right?
Yeah, I have Folk as overvalued. We did see him once or twice over the past 2 seasons. He just left this past offseason through the portal. And did land at a G5 school, so he's found a home and will keep playing football, but not at the Power 4 level, and we didn't really see him do a ton at Syracuse. So
on to Jatius Gear, came out of South Carolina as a defensive lineman, 6'5", 260, 114th at his position, 12th in the state, 3-star prospect. I'm tempted to say I met expectations on him, but what do you think?
I have him between net expectations and underrated, honestly, because he's one of those guys that there was a reaction when he left. Like, people weren't happy that they lost him through the portal. He was one of those guys that had a breakout year. This was 2022 now. I don't think he was here he wasn't here last season. So he had a breakout year and then chooses to go try and find somewhere else. And he does land at another Power 4 school. So it's like one breakout season, like, is that enough to constitute like, an overvalue or an undervaluing, like, versus like met expectations? I think you could argue both ways. I think if he had stuck around Syracuse, he would maybe more firmly be in that undervalued category. I think he could have had another strong season here. But yeah, I kind of went between the two with him.
Austin Roone comes out of Michigan, a linebacker prospect, 6'4", 220, 3 stars, 107th at his position, 31st in the state of Michigan, which is pretty good. And I think he fits into a couple other names maybe we've mentioned so far, Emily. There's been so much depth at that position that maybe in a different world he shines through, but I would probably say overvalued at this point if maybe met expectations, came in, was a depth guy.
Yeah, I think between he was more on the depth chart than Sparrow was. Sparrow we talked about last episode. But yeah, again, that depth at that linebacking room, like, I think there's like good guys in that room, but just many of them don't see playing time.
Now here's a guy who's going to make for an interesting conversation. One Oronde Gadsden II from American Heritage in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 6'4", 190 coming in as a wide receiver listed here, and of course made a significant position change. He was 184th at his position, 139th in the state, 3 stars, certainly had the recognition, of course, from OG Senior, who played in the National Football League. But OG makes the switch to tight end while still technically kind of a receiver, but
still
that's
basically
his position.
Playing receiver.
Exactly. Still playing receiver, but with the TE there at his position. 70 catches, 1,060 yards, 7 touchdowns, first team All ACC. And even with the injury, which is a significant one that he has to recover from this year, you say OG, I think people recognize, when healthy, one of the most significant weapons you can have on a football team, and pair him with a healthy OG with Kyle McCord in that offense, and good things are going to happen. But that's what I'm wondering about, Emily, the injury. How much does the injury come into the conversation here? I'm definitely going to say undervalued because of what he did right off the bat and what he can do this year before we all expect him to leave for the National Football League. But I don't know, the injury kind of throws a little monkey wrench in the equation here.
Yeah, it will certainly be interesting to see just his response to that. I think obviously, like, physically it seems like everything has gone well, and that's what I've been told by his dad on pretty much every step of the journey, and that's what Franz told us in the spring, right? So like physically it seems to go well. I think the biggest thing is always the mental side. He hasn't had any other major, well, he doesn't have like any like crazy injuries. Like, I don't think he's missed a season for injury before, but he has had other stuff pop up, I believe, in high school and stuff. So he does have a little bit of that experience with what's this like. And his dad battled a few injuries. And obviously he has connections to people that he can probably talk to who have battled this specific injury. And he's gotten some advice, I'm sure, on that. I mean, he's firmly in the undervalued category, no matter what. Like, his sophomore season was just so strong. He has probably the strongest name recognition on the team outside of Kyle McCord now. And, I think it's one thing to bring up, and which we know with him and could be the case with some of these other guys that end up on our undervalued list, is like, I've talked with his dad about how this class, their recruitment started in 2020 during the pandemic. And so guys weren't going out to games, recruits weren't going to camps. OG Senior, OG1 also just didn't want to take Oronde to camps like that. Like, he didn't feel that was the best way to showcase his talent. And a lot of those camps, are like isolated skill set camps and aren't actually football camps. And so he didn't go to as many of those where he would have been as visible in this process. And so
that's a great
point.
That's
one you can hypothesize about how many of these guys maybe just weren't seen by as many people as they should have been, and might have ended up higher and weren't because they weren't seen.
And we should probably apply that to a lot of these guys, right? In these past 2 pods that we've done, the unique circumstance of recruiting through a pandemic. Now, OG's a guy that's going to pop no matter what. in that
Right.
situation, but still comes in undervalued, pardon me, and could really firmly put him as one of the more undervalued prospects in recent years if he has the production this season that most expect him to. That leads us to Terry Lockett Jr. out of Springfield, Massachusetts, defensive tackle who was rated 155th at his position, 9th in the state of Massachusetts as a 3-star prospect coming in. I'm going to put him at met expectations, Emily. I think he came in rated as somebody you feel would get on the field, be production. I almost put him in the Leon Lowry category. Like, he has popped in certain ways. He can get after the quarterback. He's a name that sticks out on the field. And depth guy, trench guy, and a name that pops at that position. And I wouldn't put him in either overvalued or undervalued. I think he did exactly what was expected.
Yeah, I had him in the met expectations category as well. I think Terry had a good season last year. He's one of those guys that's had an injury in the past few years that kind of limited him a little bit. But certainly he had like a strong enough career at Syracuse that I think he lands in the met expectations category. He left this past offseason. He's headed to JMU, where notably he is with past rumored potential Syracuse head coach Bob Chesney from Holy Cross.
That's top 25 program last year. We'll see if Chesney can keep that going. And Lockett, one of those players that I don't think people were upset to see leave, but you're like, oh, all right, well, I liked him. I liked what I saw. Kind of like Leon Lowry, who we talked about earlier, right, with Wisconsin. You're like, oh, that's not a guy you want to see leave, but certainly will be productive there.
It is interesting. I will say one thing. It is interesting is he plays that defensive tackle spot, which they haven't filled out in quite the same way as they have the edge rushers in this new D line. And so like it is kind of like, okay, what if they had managed to hold on to Lockett or Darden, who I know doesn't meet Fran Brown's big people pummel little people mentality, which I get. It's mostly true, but like Darden's numbers were good last year and Lockett's numbers were pretty good last year. And so that defensive tackle spot, I think, depending on how this year's tackles do, we might look back at that and be like, Terry Lockett was a bigger loss than we thought.
Kalen Ellis, we brought up injuries with a couple of guys, and I feel like he'll fit into this category as well, but he comes in from Hawaii, 6'5", 350 at the time. He was 89th at his position, 7th in the state of Hawaii. And as we talked about in the last pod, Emily, with Chris Bleich, this is an offensive line that really struggled 2019, 2020. So to bring in bigger prospects, to bring in people that, to use a term, had to kind of rescue the offensive line, I think there was a lot of expectation with Ellis. He got on the field, but do you put him in the overvalued category just because maybe we didn't see him pan out the way he could have because of injury?
I don't know. I mean, maybe I had him in met expectations. He was like supposed to be a starter, so like he was good enough for that. He has the size coming in. Like, again, like the metric I'm using for the 3-star, like I think he met what a 3-star should be and was on the field some and would have been on the field more if not for his injury. Same injury as Gadsden, which has kind of gotten brushed under the rug, but he also had a sprained injury, as we found out later in the season. So yeah, I haven't met expectations. I think he could have done more, but I don't hold that against him because he had injuries.
Kendall Long was a receiver out of Lexington, South Carolina, who was 207th at his position, 20th in the state, 3-star prospect. Where are we putting Kendall Long?
I have Kendall Long in overvalued. He was around, but he didn't ever do much for them. I don't think.
Not a name that popped. Nope.
Yeah, and in their receiving room that desperately needed someone to pop too. Like he wasn't able to step up and fill that. So
on to Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff, 5th in the state of New York coming in. It's always notable when you get those top prospects to stay home. He was 174th at his position, 6'3", 260-pound defensive lineman who has been productive, who has been on the field, who was right there in the mix. The play on the sideline against Clemson a couple of years ago, that's probably what he's most noted for at this point. We look back on that play and how that was officiated, and that continues to be a topic of discussion. Syracuse was right in the mix to knock off Clemson there until that play happened. and has an opportunity to maybe put himself in a different category. But right now, I've pretty much got him at met expectations.
Same, and I think he's probably expected to start, if not just be a depth chart player this year, and so he's going to continue to contribute. And I'll be curious to see how he does this season.
Couple offensive tackles that we probably put in the didn't meet expectations category, Emily. Tyler Magnuson came in from Minneapolis, 6'5", 260. He was 9th in the state of Minnesota, 121st at his position. He ended up transferring. Austin Kwai, another Hawaii prospect, also 6'5", 260, by the way, who was 8th in the state and just fell down the depth chart there. So we'll move on to a couple other guys. Landon Morris, who came in from Indiana. He was a tight end, 6'5", 210, so that kind of popped to see the size at that point. He was 24th in the state, 87th at his position, but where would we ultimately put him?
I mean, I've never even heard of him until we went to go do this, so he's in the overvalued category.
From that to somebody who is going to create an interesting discussion here, which will put the cherry on top this year, and that's Derek McDonald from Atlanta, who, remember, came in as a tight end, listed here 6'4", 230, 90th at his position, 142nd in that state, and is now a pretty darn productive linebacker at Syracuse, and a name that, Fran Brown was pretty direct. You could even say it was harsh in analyzing some players sometimes, but I felt like every time he talked about him, it's pretty complimentary and somebody he's looking to kind of lead that linebacker group. So given the position he came in and position and the ratings he was at, I'd put him firmly in the undervalued category.
Okay. I haven't met expectations, but I think he will move up this season. I mean, he's going to start alongside Marlowe Wax. That just seems inevitable at this point. He's had like a pretty traditional rise through the depth chart, right? Like he got onto the field in 2022 as I believe a redshirt freshman because of Stephen Thompson's injury. I think that's what forced him into the mix. Did well enough in that season that last season he had a role, and he did at times like split time a little bit, but definitely by the end of the season it was okay. It's Derek, very intelligent guy, good to talk to. So yeah, I think it's fair that you have him in the undervalued. I certainly think he's going to work his way up. I think this could be a breakout season for him, and that we'll see him a little higher up on some of the like total tackles list and PFF grades and stuff like that.
For sure. Chase Simmons came in from North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, defensive line, 6'4", 240, 206th at his position, 31st in the state of South Carolina. You had Jacob Bradford listed here, an offensive tackle from Iowa Central Community College, 6'5"-ish. We'll give him 300 pounds, 10th at his position, 7th in the state. Coming in as well. What do we assess Simmons and Bradford? What categories are they in?
Simmons, I haven't met expectations. He's another guy that's had injuries, so it's honestly a little more like don't have enough data than anything else. So maybe I guess that's what I'd say. Bradford is no stars. So I have him as undervalued because he's been a starter for them and has been a consistent depth chart guy in the O-line. And he's listed as an offensive tackle here. He plays guard now, and I think he will end up on the depth chart again this year. So he's an undervalued guy for me. I mean, I don't think he's like the best O-lineman they have, but considering he came in unrated in the composite, was he rated just like by 247?
Yeah, I've got 3 stars, but that may be as a transfer.
Oh, that's true as well.
Because he was unrated as a prospect. So I mean, factor that in a little bit, but
yeah. So I had him as undervalued just because he has been a consistent guy on an O-line that has seen a lot of faces in the last few years, right?
So that brings us to Wes Ho, Glen Ellen, Illinois, offensive line, 6'4", 250, 3 stars, 52nd in the state, 146th at his position.
Yeah, I think it's probably between the two. It was interesting. Remember, Dino tried to use him in a little bit of a Rhino-esque role in the 2022 season. Not consistently, but it also like wasn't unsuccessful when they did it. It was kind of really weird because like you knew how well it worked with Rhino, and so it just didn't look the same and feel the same. Obviously, that Rhino was still on the team that season, but was injured and did not play at all. And so they tried to sub Wesson there a little bit. But yeah, he's an interesting case because he was a name that you like heard a lot in the 2022 season. I think he could go between. He transferred out and is at UConn, I believe. So another guy that Syracuse should see this fall.
We kind of saved the best for last here. Garrett Shrader transfers in from Mississippi State. He was in a competition to start camp with Tommy DeVito. He wins the job in that season, and what was an interesting transition at the time, given that DeVito came in, highly rated prospect, 4 stars, the heir apparent to Eric Dungy. We all know the story, right? And in comes Shrader. It was a style of play. He eventually kind of grew to have a lot of humor with the media. He grew the beard, kind of became a personality. Obviously, injuries really came into play. It transitioned the whole offense last season into that kind of jerry-rig thing they had to run with Dan Villari and LaQuint Allen taking snaps. But you look at it, when Shrader is done, he returns for that Wake Forest game, which they needed to win to get the bowl eligibility. He does it. And he gets to the end of a career, Emily, where he's 4th in rushing touchdowns, 5th in total yards, passing, and completions, and is in several other top 10, top 15 categories in Syracuse football history in essentially 2.5 seasons because of how much he missed in 2023. That's pretty darn good. That is undervalued to me, and that is the essence of what you want out of a transfer. He came in, won the job, and walked away productive and quarterback back-to-back bowl teams. That's pretty darn good.
Yeah, I think you can definitely put Garrett in the undervalued category. It is like a very bumpy career he had here and a very up and down career. And, you know, there were moments as recent as the Clemson game of last season where we were like, is he one of the best quarterbacks Syracuse has had? I don't think that conversation was probably a little overblown, and I think we can say that now. But certainly, like, I think he deserves more credit for what he did do than he was getting near the end of his.
That's a great way to put it.
Here. Like you mentioned, he does have spots on several of the top 10 lists. He obviously came in off a season where he hadn't even been playing quarterback. So he had been transitioned to wide receiver and then brought in and asked to transition back to quarterback and won that starting job that same season. And so he did a lot of good, I think, for this program. It just unfortunately was overshadowed by injuries, and not just the injuries, but the shroud of mystery that was placed around his health status for 2 straight seasons. Because, you know, and I think I've said this before, if not on here, then to you or to other people just in the media and around us, like, I think if there had been more transparency around Garrett's injuries specifically, a lot of conversation, not just about him, but also about this entire team the past 2 years changes, because there was just so much both years that we didn't realize they were dealing with until the end of the year. And it's like, okay, well, now knowing that Garrett wasn't practicing for most of last season changes how I think about the fact that the receivers couldn't seem to catch anything he threw them. Well, they didn't have any chemistry with him because they weren't practicing with him. And he was out of practice because he was only going in, throwing 1 day a week when he like went in for games and stuff like that. And so like, it makes me feel like a little bit sad for him. You know, I think he was a more sheltered guy as well. So I'm sure some of that was his own preference. He did like to be a little more coy with us and stuff like that. But it's just such an interesting reframing when you think back on like his ankle injury in the back half of the 2022 season, and then knowing that he had the shoulder stuff, and he also had whatever was going on with his elbow that he missed last spring for. Like, there's just so much that went on with him that he fought through a lot of the times. Like, I mean, he carried them to some really good wins, and like
He did.
obviously the 6-0 start to the 2022 season. I know he did a lot the season right before I got here in 2021. But unfortunately, just because the lows were so low, and so often, right, it gets blamed on the quarterback, especially offensive struggles like the ones Syracuse was going through. Like, the lows were so low that I think a lot of what he did do gets not ignored, but overlooked, I think.
Well, it gets overlooked and overshadowed because it took place at the end of the Babers era when there was so much focus on making a coaching change, to no fault of Shrader's own, given what you just detailed in the injuries he was going through. I brought up the numbers, Emily, but I feel like it's going to be the intangibles that people remember. Like, I remember writing a column after that Wake Forest game, and we were there in that press room, and Shrader is in tears describing how he had to play this game for his team. We knew how beat up he was. He managed to have a pretty darn good game. Despite that, he's doing flips on the field. And I think he'll be remembered as kind of what we brought up, the personality, maybe too much of a fault. He would take on all comers in terms of tacklers. He would challenge people. He's a big guy. He could challenge defenders, but ultimately that ended up kind of putting a dent in his career. Yet look at the numbers he put up, the back-to-back seasons that he contributed to where this team went to a bowl game. I feel like in 5-10 years, I'm going to have to remind people, like, wait a minute. Don't forget what Garrett Shrader did. Yeah, he's not up there in the McPherson, McNabb, Dungy, Nassib lineage, but he's in the top 5 of a lot of categories and was in a unique spot as quarterback of this team. And I think that last game, of course, he didn't play in the bowl game because he got surgery right after that, but I feel like you're only as good as your last game sometimes, and ultimately people are going to remember that he came in, got him over the finish line, and what was a trying circumstance.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. I think the intangibles, I think that's a great way of putting it. And I'll toss it to the subscribers. I'd be curious to know, like, if anyone's, like, in the 7 months since, like, last season ended and Garrett's kind of disappeared a little bit. There are videos of him that pop up on his social. He is back to throwing. He seems like his recovery is going well, but obviously doesn't seem to be headed towards an NFL career. Maybe he lands in the UFL, which is rising in prominence. But I'd be curious if, like, any of the subscribers have, like, feel like they've changed their tune on Garrett or softened on Garrett since like middle of last season to now. Like, I mean, I think coming off that Virginia Tech game, like, so many people were just so upset, and a lot of it was funneled towards him because that was probably the worst game of his collegiate career. Then we found out he got his shoulder hurt in that game and probably should not have been playing most of it. And so, like, I'm curious for people if that has been reframed and they've kind of come to terms with, hey, maybe this is the guy that if circumstances had been different, we'd feel a lot better about. I don't know.
A great toss to the Syracuse Sports Insiders to what they think about that and what you think about our assessment of 2021 and 2020. Next week, Emily and I will look back on 2022 and more recent class, of course, 2023, and how many of those guys are going to have a role, even in the new era here with Fran Brown taking over. Become a Syracuse Sports Insider today by texting the word orange to 315-847-3895. Try it free for 2 weeks. You can text with me directly, your thoughts, your opinions, your questions. We love to get you involved when we're doing these podcasts. Get your feedback and what you think about these things, your suggestions for future pods that we're going to be doing throughout the summer as we get closer and closer to the start of Syracuse football season. So thanks for being a Syracuse Sports Insider if you are one, and if you're not, hop on board and tell us what you thought about this pod and all the conversations that we have here on Syracuse Sports. For now, I'm Brent Dax. That's Emily Leiker. We'll catch you next time here on Syracuse Sports.